I was gritty too. So like we didn't have health insurance, but I didn't fold. I wasn't like, I didn't give up. I didn't say, I was like, I could bankrupt this dairy thing, just let it and just ruin, because the other stuff was actually working.
Mm-hmm.
And I was out doing sales. Like I bought this other business, and I wound up finding a private lender to solve some of my, sticky situation with the bank. And, praise God for the kindness of those souls through that. But man, I was also mean. Like I would start gentle and like, hey, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm working on. But the moment I had like profitability starting to look okay again, I was like, I contacted all of my vendors in one setting and said, I'll pay you 35 cents on the dollar. If you don't believe that I'm going to pay you, take this check. I'll write you a check right now.
Yeah.
And if you think I'm going to pay you with interest, then wait it out. What's your choice?
Welcome to Through the Dip, the show about what it's really like to be an entrepreneur and the hard-won lessons that you learn by navigating your company through the dip. My name is Steven Souter, and before we get started on today's episode, this show is brought to you by HustleFish, a digital marketing agency that focuses on getting your business unstuck and moving forward. If you want a free marketing audit, head over to throughthedip.com/marketing. Now, on today's episode, how Daryl Starr's quest for maximizing his return on every acre of his farm led him down the path of creating a seasonal dairy. Now, Daryl grew up in a farming family and worked with his father, but ultimately split ways due to differing business decisions and ideas. He started his own crop consulting business, which is really where he honed his skill at figuring out how to get the most value from every acre on his farm. Looking for ways to grow faster, he took a portion of his farm and converted it into a dairy. What seemed like a shoe-in of an idea turned out to be quite a bit riskier than he originally thought. This is Daryl's story on taking that risk head-on and the true cost of those hard-won lessons.
So my dad and I decided that working together was disruptive to our family relationship. And I left the farm operation, and that was a hard season between the two of us, but I think in the long term it was good for both of us. And I'd started a crop consulting business, and really what I would consider now a data management service company.
Yeah.
So,
What's crop consulting?
so the basic business plan that I had was to take people's precision ag data, so like soil sample, GPS, geocoded data in their farm fields, and their financials, and then blend those things together and do this comprehensive like profit mapping and manage their contribution margin and overhead, machinery costs, the whole thing, and just basically be a strategic advisor for large farm operations.
So it's kind of like, the number side and how like machinery
Yeah.
correlates to overhead and how to write it off, how to capitalize
It was agronomy and finance
Yeah.
like smashed together was my jam. So
So you're consulting on other people's farms that are bigger than your
much
farm.
bigger than mine. Yeah. And my dad and I like farm operations and split. So I had my ground, and he had his, and we weren't getting along. And then I'm working with these other large farms kind of throughout eastern Indiana, doing this data management because I wanted to go faster.
Yeah.
And had learned some things and wanted to use and charge for those things. So that data management business was kind of one side of my kind of book of business. And then the production side of the farm was really what I would consider more of a factory kind of production side.
Yeah.
Real estate investing kind of components to that. So the reason for the dairy was I bought ground and, could see that growing, but it was just, I wanted to have a higher return on assets than what I could generate in row crop farming, even with all of my excellent management. And so the dairy really combined with a couple of different things that were going on in the marketplace, like confinement hog operations were becoming a really big and popular thing in the east central Indiana area that I was in. And some people were like, oh, you should build one of these $1 million buildings, and you could borrow a lot on it and all that. And I'm like, yeah, but when it's worn out, then you have a worn out hog barn. It's like, I don't want a worn out hog barn. And simultaneously, I was meeting all these really interesting no-till cover crop kind of regenerative soil health farmers that I just really respected the way they were going about taking care of the land. And I had begun to form this belief around bringing more manure and livestock back into the soil climate. And then simultaneously, I had this like niche and business, bent that was like, oh, if I could have a branded cheese facility, this network of all of these farmers that I'm meeting, I could probably have like a contract production relationship with some of these farms
Yeah.
throughout the state. And we could all, have milk and cheese grown in this very sustainable, beautiful soil health sort of way. So that was kind of my grand vision for
Yeah.
it.
But why milk and cheese? Because it felt like the easiest way to make the most money off of the land.
The per acre economics of that were high, and I figured if I got to that, then adding or buying land after that I wanted to make that kind of a no brainer
Yeah.
decision, not necessarily a like, well, you just normal, just buy it and farm it. Like that was too boring. So I wanted to be able to do something more valuable on that particular plot.
Yeah.
So if I'd lived in near a city, I probably would have been a real estate developer or something. But
Yeah.
I was into regenerative farming and like what that meant for
You had farmland. That's where you lived. That's where you started.
yeah, it's
So
like these are my assets. Like, what can I do that's more valuable than just
Yeah.
go buying more of the same thing? So
Yeah. So you decide to start this dairy. What like where do you start with start a dairy when you never worked in the dairy industry before?
yeah, I didn't milk cows until after we were into it. So I basically started with a business plan. I started like writing all the stuff, researching all this, compiling. I showed up to my banker with this 3-ring binder of all of these interviews I'd done and different places I'd visited and the math and the pictures and like here's how this works.
Yeah.
And was just super fascinated by this whole management intensive grazing. Seasonal dairying was really not a thing it's barely done now in the US, but
Yeah.
it was very New Zealand kind of inspired. And
Can you describe seasonal fed dairy or what it was seasonal dairy
Yeah.
dairy is and also like how you stumbled across it? Because like if you're in Indiana and the dairies
don't-
here are like these big
I don't know how I
things.
don't know. I think I just got to thinking and looking and reading and was like, chickens have some of the highest conversion of feed to meat on a per pound basis, but I don't know. I couldn't really brand that. The hogs, I was already like not inclined to have a terrible hog barn, but the way a seasonal is, all of the cow at a typical dairy farm, the cows calve in at a variety of times, so you always have milk. In a seasonal dairy, they all calve in kind of as close together as possible, which puts all of the calving in one window, ideally in the spring, and then in the fall or the winter, then you stop milking because they're pregnant and you actually turn off milking. And we had a few calves, and so seasonal calving was a very normal. Like I understood that. And I was like, that's not that big of a deal. Who cares if I don't have milk? I only sell grain, once or twice a year. So being out of milk for 2 months is not that big of a deal. So a couple of hurdles there, and then
Why is that business model more efficient, or why go after that business model versus because
Sure.
just hearing you say that,
Yeah.
to me it's like what more milk over the year is better, but you're talking about like milking and then stopping for
Yeah.
time and like having all the cows on this like cyclical cycle where most dairies are utilizing their milking parlors
Yeah, the
24/7,
heavier
right?
assets,
And so
right.
like they're just generating money off that milking parlor where you're like shutting the whole thing down for
Yeah,
several
but
months.
the vision was to have a very, very simple milking parlor. We had no manure storage. Like the cows were out on the grass. They were moved this is the management intensive. So every 12 hours we would move them between a different paddock. And so they would eat here, put 150 head in this small area. They come into the parlor, be milked, go to a different area. And so that back and forth action, basically they got their own food, they spread their own poop. We had a very tiny barn. And so the asset intensity was just in the land and in the cows themselves.
So you're able to reduce that overhead so much that the need to have your milking parlor running 24/7 is no
It
longer.
wasn't that big of a deal.
No
Yeah,
longer
we could just winterize it.
Yeah.
So
That's
yeah.
cool.
Yeah. So it was a kind of crazy vision thinking
Yeah.
back on it, but I was just completely obsessed. And I'd spent a long time, multiple years dreaming and planning.
How
and
old were you?
working. Mid-20s.
Okay.
So
And so you have this business plan. You're going to banks saying, "Hey, Give me a loan.
Yeah, I basically was like, everything I've done has worked, so obviously this will work.
Obviously.
And just to make sure that you're a little bit more comfortable, like here's all the details.
Yeah. How much
Uh,
were you asking for? Like, how much did you need
to get it off the
Yeah.
ground, it was not that much, like in the hundreds of thousands of dollars to get it going, which I thought was great. I mean, I'd already borrowed more than that, and owning land and the other farm operational side. Like there was two things going on in my world, right? I had this asset light data management business
Mhm.
that was generating cash, and really there was no place to reinvest in that. And then this real estate production that was very capital intensive, and you could borrow money on it really easily because there was tons of collateral and it was cash flow positive as well.
Yeah.
But so I had bought another consulting business, another asset light business on terms with the seller. So this side was growing, and I needed a place to invest proceeds coming off of this. And so I was like, I need to improve my. The simple thing would have just been to buy more land.
Yeah.
I was like, that's too simple. So
And you wanted to make more money than what you could off
just
of the
just
land,
like
right?
off
Like,
the land,
yeah,
right?
like
Right. I thought the
dollars per
yield was
acre.
terrible.
Yeah.
Like I didn't really like farming because it couldn't go fast enough. And it was super capital intensive and had low returns. So
Yeah.
like, it's not really a great business if you're trying to get rich. So, which is what I was trying to do.
Yeah, yeah. So you have you have your
Dairying turns out it's not either.
not the way to get rich.
No.
So you have your farm, you have your crop consulting. You've purchased a crop consulting company, but
Yeah.
you want to maximize your dollars per acre because you can make more money than trying to like do this capital intensive row crop.
Yeah, my return on assets, I could put another several $100,000 into this to make more on the same acreage and get a higher return on assets
Yeah.
rather than taking that and going and adding another farm that would have a low yield on the assets.
Yeah.
So
And so was it hard to get a loan for that? Or were banks like,
no, they were
yeah,
like,
this
sure,
is
sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they literally were like, I might convert my farm. Like, I was like, okay, I'll put you down in a few years. Like, let me get this one started, and then you
Yeah.
can sign up later.
Yeah.
And literally, I mean, I was meeting all these other farms, and I was like, hey, this is what I'm doing. Here's how I help you here. And then the ones that I was close with, like, could get them bought into the vision of this cheese factory and all of that vision.
So you get the loan, you start building this. You use land you already have, or did you
Yes.
purchase more?
Yeah. So it took a really highly productive farm, corn and soybean, massive yield. I tiled it like it was a beautiful, beautiful farm. And we put in this 900-foot. Well, the first thing we did was we drilled a well. So the well driller and I are out there. And I don't know if you've ever been with a well driller, but they're jankety old trucks. Or at least the guy was who drilled our well. It's jankety old truck, banging this thing into the ground. And I was like, this is where I want the well. And so, anyway, so many thoughts. My dad and grandpa would have had a witching stick out walking around, like, nope, I want the well right here. Like, and they go banging this well in, and like, it got a little bit of water, but it was not enough for what I needed. I'm like, oh crap. And I'm like, I just blew 10 grand. Let's go over there close to the neighbor's well. There's probably water over there. And then we wind up hitting that. It works. So then I'm like, put this 900-foot driveway in, construction starts on the building. And then I wind up picking up another existing dairy. So, which is also kind of crazy in the midst of that.
Like you purchased it.
I bought a bunch of cows. The farm was leased, but it had a going operation with it because obviously this was going to work, and I needed to get big fast.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I got into that in the midst of that. And then, I mean, there's so many things. In my notes, it was like the well went in. I bought 80 heifers that are calves at the time from some Amish guy in northern Indiana. And the employee that I had hired, well, her husband just so happened to have a master's degree in forestry and was an ambitious young guy as well. And so I had my 80 heifers delivered to his farm, not my farm, because I didn't have any fence. I didn't have any water. So let's drop these off at your place and you can take care of them and I'll pay you. He thought it was great. And then I remember being at his place and he bought the skid steer and it was just getting stuck in the mud. Like he couldn't feed my cows. And we had to put this like chain thing around his tires in order to get through this terrible mud for these cows. And so
What did
I tell all that because there's like multiple dips along the way that are like most people would have stopped. Like most people would have been like, that's crazy. What are you doing? And
as you're doing all this stuff, like you're 25, you're like wheeling and dealing, buying dairies, buying crop
mm,
consulting companies, trying to start your own dairy.
mhm.
Um, like what were people telling you? Were they like, oh man, Daryl's like on fire? Like
Yeah,
what? Like
can't lose.
yeah.
Like yeah. So I mean, I was definitely my ego was growing.
Was anybody telling you to slow down? Like
My
maybe
wife. Yeah, I reflected on that a little bit too. Like she was definitely like two. So I was like, well, yeah, like
two's better
if
than one.
one's good, two's better.
Yeah. So
So I didn't really listen.
yeah, but like it's if everyone's like cheering you on, saying like, "Man, look at Daryl! Like he's doing all this crazy stuff.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
he's like building these huge businesses and getting
Yeah,
his
I don't know
tails."
if they weren't huge, but they were.
But for 25, like
Yeah,
going out and doing your own thing
it was.
like that, like that's a pretty good
Yeah,
good sized stuff
I was
for
rolling
being that
hard.
young.
Yeah, my friends were like, I got married young, so I was 21 when we got married. So we'd been married for several years. Um, we'd had our first child, uh, and so I had a 1-year-old. Like kind of when some of this stuff was going on, and then yeah, in the middle of the dairy, we had our second. Like we were having kids. Life was good. We're happy.
So as you're building out the dairy, there's some problems that are going on, but like nothing horrific. It sounds like
No, no, no.
like nothing
Kinda like
to make you stop.
yeah, I mean, well, I have to look at my notes. The construction, when we poured concrete to like the foundation of the building, this is like metaphorically funny. Uh, they didn't pour the right dimensions, so the foundation actually wound up bigger than it was supposed to be. I was like, "What kind of idiots are you?" uh, but it just like there was like those were just big things, but also kind of small things in the grand scheme of it. But I just kept like plowing on. It's like, okay, well,
But the small things all add up.
they do add up.
Especially if you're, spending $10,000 for a well, then have to put another well in, and
Right.
then you pour two more
Too much
concrete.
concrete. The concrete's expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah. We seeded our pastures and that part went really well. But I don't know if you've ever seen like a young pasture. It's not the like idyllic, picturesque thing that was in my 3-ring binder. Like they take time to get to that. And I knew that mathematically, but to see them and be like, it doesn't look great. It looks like thin,
Yeah.
and this needs to be lush because it's how much food can each cow get with every bite, and
Yeah.
this is not lush. So there's like moments along the way, but I mean, it'll get there. Like,
Yeah.
just keep going. So
You got your business plan, and
yeah, we're just trying to work the plan. And
so when did you realize that things were not panning out? Like
yeah,
really started like, oh man, like
yeah. When did the dips sort
start
of
happening?
hit me?
Yeah, like you have these little blips around the way. You're still like very optimistic. It sounds like.
Yeah, no, I was frustrated. Those were just frustrating things of like things don't always work. You fix them, go on,
Yeah.
deal with it, roll with the punches. But so we had moved. We lived about 2 hours away. So this adds like another level of complexity
From the dairy, so you would have to drive 2 hours.
yeah.
to
So it
go
wasn't
check
just
on
like out my back.
Yeah.
Like I'm part of the reason the foundation was wrong. Like I didn't live there. I was 2 hours away. And so we live in Lafayette at the time. The farm is back near my hometown in Connorsville. The other farm is northeast of Kokomo.
Okay.
And I'm sitting on the roof of my house. I think I was supposed to be hanging Christmas lights on our house because I don't know. This is a thing you do when you're 20s and by yourself, and you're what wants Christmas lights on the house. I wanted Christmas lights on
Yeah.
my house, so I'm on the roof of my house, and I get this phone call. And we've been shipping milk from one place. The new construction place started shipping milk, and I was like, okay, it's coming online. Like, here we are. The cows we're milking. We're milking now.
This is the first time.
Very first batch of milk. Like, we're milking we milked cows. It works. Like, everything works. I wasn't even there. We milked. It was a great job. Whatever. I think we got 2 milkings in. The tanker truck shows up. Nice driveway, nice turnaround. He backs up to the tank. He hooks up. He loads. He leaves. I get my call on the roof of my house that says, hey, we just contaminated a whole tanker load of not only our milk, but everybody else's milk. So you're not selling milk today. You're buying milk today. I have to buy everybody else's milk that went into that semi load.
So it wasn't a full semi of your milk.
I didn't have a full semi.
It was part of other people's milk. It's part of your
They all
milk.
get mixed in, go into
How did it get contaminated?
So we had one cow that had been treated, and that milk from that cow was supposed to be disposed, and then all of the other cow's milk into the tank. Well, whatever, in the excitement of the day of the first milking, we wound up putting that treated cow, instead of disposing of it, we wound up putting that milk in, and it gets tested, and they tested it and said, they had a test of ours before it goes into the tank, and they test everybody on the route. Test, load, test, load,
Yeah.
test, load. And so they tested ours and then find out after the fact that it's contaminated. So at that moment, my brain goes to like, oh crap. Like, this is more than just mud and
Yeah.
a well. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm on the roof of my house. There's mistakes that are going to continue to be made.
Yeah.
It's not like we'll just milk now and I'll cash checks. Like, that's not how this is going to work.
Why weren't you there? Like at the first milking. That feels like
things to do. I hang Christmas lights.
Yeah. Fair enough. What were you?
There's big business.
How did you deal with that situation and like employees that were supposed to do the right thing and they obviously did not?
Yeah, I mean, at that point, like, I had consulting business was like 25 people, 27 people, something like this. The dairies, I'd hired a manager that had run a very large dairy to like go from managing 1,200 cows to managing my 150. He was loving life. He's like, this is cool. Like, I love it. The pace is going to be good. Like, it's better for the health of the animals. It's so awesome. So he was actually a really good manager. And he was more hot tempered than I was. And so when people needed to be corrected on the farm, like he knew how to take care of cows, which
Yeah.
I did a good job in getting him. The other manager was a very like super hard worker. And he and his wife lived on the property, and they did a really good job and had occasional help. But he just worked like a freaking animal at that place.
Did you think about firing people like because of this?
No,
mistake?
heck no, I didn't want to milk cows.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I mean, at that point, like, he just made a stupid mistake. But it really, in and of and by itself, that particular thing was no different than the well, or no different
Yeah.
than the,
Like how much money is that?
I don't know, it was in the tens of thousands.
Okay, wow.
So, but at the time, the tripping point for me was just like, I'm in over my head. Like, this isn't necessarily like a financial statement that's saying this. It's just, you're an idiot, Daryl. Like, you are literally not there. You're going to continue to have problems here, and you have no idea what you're doing.
Yeah.
Is what's going through my head.
At that point in time, what did the business look like from a revenue, cash flow kind of standpoint? Like, especially like with your three different streams. Like you have your cows, which you took like a loan for to like build, but then you have this other cash flow coming in. Like, is it all balancing out? And like, is it like, are you taking money from your consulting stuff to fund dairy stuff?
Yeah, at that point, I wasn't necessarily. I'd taken some like investment capital off of the consulting business to start the business, but it wasn't really losing money yet because we were still turning it on. And the dairy up north, which had been milking, was doing fine, and the economics of milk at the time were like 23 dollars a hundredweight, and our break even was like $13.50.
Okay,
So the math was like 40% margin.
Yeah, that's
of
crazy.
business. So I was like, all these row crop farmers are suckers. What are they doing out here? You can't make that kind of margin.
Yeah.
So, and I'd put on some hedges and stuff to like protect the construction process. So I'd pre-sold at some of those what I considered really attractive prices. And thanks to my dad for teaching me how to do that and executing that. And
Can you quickly explain hedges for me and how that works and why you took them out as someone that's not a farmer?
oh yeah, sure. No, you can hedge anything. I mean, you could hedge on the stock market and options and so forth. But you're basically buying the right to sell at a certain price. And so if the prices change, then you've got a difference between that you can trade your option in for a higher value. You sell at the low price, and the net equals back to where you were when you started.
Got it.
So 22, I buy an option to sell it at 22.
Yeah.
Milk prices as we started shipping at the new construction facility, started plummeting. And so then as I'm selling the milk, I'm selling milk and then I'm unwinding this hedge. I'm making money on the hedge. I'm losing money as I sell, but then I'm net back to 22.
Yeah.
So everything's cool while you have the hedge on. I'm then like, okay, things are not going to go perfectly here. And I need to start converting into some term loans, and the milk price is coming down in a hurry. So I contact my banker and I say, hey, construction's done. We're underway. Things are working. Feel pretty good about that. The thing I don't feel pretty good about is the milk price is plummeting.
Yeah.
And we're going to roll these over to a term. And then we've got this other stuff that probably should term out because it's going to be, we might lose money this first year. And they were like, no.
Because they were worried that you weren't going to be able to pay the
Yeah. So I mean, a bank, I knew this going into it, but I knew it like more acutely after I understood that, bank needs, there's three-legged stool of cash flow, collateral, and management.
Mhm.
And when you can't project positive cash flow, like that's one leg of the three legs, and they're like not that interested. But I was starting to be afraid, and like later on got very afraid because all of my collateral was purchased at the $22 a hundredweight cow prices.
Yeah.
So I'm buying heifers, I'm buying cows at $3,500 a cow, and now they're worth $1,500 a cow. And so, because nobody wants cows when it's not profitable. It was not profitable just for me. It was not profitable for anyone.
So not only are milk prices going down, the assets that you had purchased, aka the cows, that price has also
Kerplunk.
yeah.
So it was two legs kicked out from the stool. And when you kick two legs out of the stool, then they just look at the manager and like, you're an idiot. So, there goes the third leg.
Yeah. Man, so you try to convert these loans into term, they say no,
Yeah.
which are you
Yeah.
like, oh crap?
I was like, this is going to be bad because, like, do you want these dairies or not? Like, we need to work on this together. Like, we're in it together. And they basically just said no. And I was like, okay, well, I need to talk to somebody else. So, yeah, I went to a family friend who was in some like private lending stuff and was like, what do I do? And they're like, well, you got two of your three legs kicked out.
Yeah.
This could be pretty rough and good luck. And I was like, thanks, friend. And
Did you start thinking you were going to lose everything at that point, or were you like, no, I can still pull this off?
I mean, at that point, I thought so the entities were separated. So at that point, I'm like the dairy, Spielwiese dairy, which is a really cool name. It means grass play area.
Oh, nice.
So I just thought this was so idyllic. Anyways, so
The branding's even good.
the branding's good. This stuff is gonna work. And so I'm not yet really thinking I'm gonna lose everything. It wasn't really until I started getting multiple calls a day from accounts payable vendors that I was slow paying that I started thinking I might lose everything. So as I talk to the bank, they say this, I start working on it. And as I start working on it, it becomes clear that I'm going to need all of my vendors to like understand what the heck is going on in my world.
By working on it, you mean working on the business or trying to find more?
Trying to find a different
Line,
loan.
yeah.
I needed a different bank. So I was like, this bank says no, I just got to find a different bank. Because that's what banks do is they're like, hot potato, I don't want it, you go find another bank.
Yeah.
But at that point, it was like, it was basically impossible for me to forecast positive cash flow. So in the dairy by itself. So, okay, so that's an issue. I start talking to vendors and just disclosing. I'm like, this is what's going on in my world. One of those vendors was actually Michael Berger, which is now a business partner. We'd begun developing some software, and I was like, hey, I'm going to be a little slow paying. I understand if you need to cut me off. I understand if you need to charge me interest. Please don't. Here's why. Here's the plan. Like, here's how I'm going to work through it.
How did you find another? Were you able to find another bank?
So, let's see. Before I get to that, I'll answer that question. But so really, banking was the thing I was working on that I was like, needs to be solved, but I need to also stop the bleeding, right?
Yeah.
So it was cutting expenses, raising revenue was like the two levers that I had, right? It got to the point where I was freaking out so badly that I basically had to hire a bookkeeper to think straight. And rather than have my bookkeeper work at my consulting business office or at the dairy, which they were not going to do, I had him work out of my house,
Okay.
which was kind of a crazy thing because it was a private place that I could decide who I was going to pay that week
Yeah.
or not pay that week. And that was a really tough time. And I think along that time, I was also coming to the realization that like the dairy might not make it back on itself. So, uh, so my areas to improve needed to come from the other side of the house, the asset light, positive cash generative
Were you
side.
talking to other people about what was going on? Like,
Like not to the depth that I wanted to. Um, so our church, I had a small group that we hosted at our house, and the men used to break into one room, women in another, and the men and I would sit in my same office that the bookkeeper had been in like an hour earlier, and I'm making all these horrible decisions, uh, and I really want to talk and try to talk, but like, yeah, I don't know. I just think I felt like I don't know honestly if I was like at the time I felt like I was scaring them to like talk about it. So
because they were so worried about whether you would actually make it or not. Like they were like, "Oh man,
no, I
like,
think they had their own problems, and I
yeah,
was like, I don't know, that we maybe weren't like in the same life place. So they were like, I don't really like my boss, or whatever. And I was like, I'm trying to figure out how to come up with 10 grand by
yeah,
the end of the day tomorrow. I have no idea. My wife at the time, and we literally are just like still unpacking some of these thoughts. Um, she had worked as a nurse when we were first married, and a great nurse, great mom, and like had made good money as a nurse, and we were able to save so much of that, which also like bolstered everything that I was doing because there was this predictable income side of the
mhm,
house. And we had our second child, and I had let our insurance lapse, and so and she had a C-section with our first one, needed to have a C-section with the second one, and we didn't have coverage.
do you remember making that decision and being like, "Ooh, this is risky," or was it just like, no, like obviously, like someone has to get paid here?
It honestly, like, that decision was not, like, the worst of my decisions. So, that was a no-brainer
Yeah,
area for me. Like, it was risky, but I don't know, I just was it's like, well, if it's catastrophe, like, I'm in a catastrophe, like,
yeah,
you're not like what's your swim stroke look like when you're in the middle of a catastrophe flood in your house? Like, am I using the right form? You're just like, "Live."
yeah, yeah,
So I was very much in the live mode, but also like I was still like, man, I had a lot of fight in me too because she tells me that we're pregnant. I'm like, okay, she doesn't know that I've canceled the insurance. I hadn't talked to her about that. Uh, I talked to her about, hey, maybe you should go back to work. It sure would be nice, but she didn't do. And for a lot of years, I held that as a grudge against my wife, and I shouldn't have because and this is part that we just have been talking about recently, is like, she literally in that time was just, like, scared out of her mind also, and just honestly believed that I would figure it out.
mm,
And so, a lot of the stuff that I was projecting about being alone or away from, redemption was just not true. Like, it was right there, like, I had my wife that was saying, "You got this."
yeah,
She wasn't saying those words, she was saying, "I'm scared too," but she wasn't even saying that, she was just like but what she was thinking then, like, I couldn't hear, I didn't wanna hear, I was just like, "What are you doing? Somebody do something around here to help me."
yeah.
Um, and nobody cared as I was very lonely and frustrated, so
Did you talk to your dad at all?
yes, no, we had a horrible relationship, like, the way broken up and the farm was, like, very hard on both of us,
Mhm.
and the last thing I wanted to do was to tell my dad that I'd messed up, like, it was a that would've been I couldn't have handled it. I couldn't handle
Yeah,
it. So, no,
man.
it was not going back to that.
So, like, business isn't going great. Though the peer group, church group that you're a part of, like, you can be somewhat open, but not like it doesn't feel like you can be as open as you wanna be.
Right.
Your
Yeah.
dad, who was kind of your mentor growing up, like, has kind of
He's kinda mad at me for leaving him high and dry and,
yeah.
yeah, breaking his heart.
How'd you keep going?
I think I just, like, bootstrap, sort of pull myself up by my bootstraps, and that's not exactly true. Sometimes I tell this story and that's the version that I give people.
Yeah.
Um, but honestly, it was a lot of prayerful time for
Mm,
me. Like, we had we had a missionary that I'd pledged to support that I had to go to and be like, "I'm I'm not gonna I'm not gonna be able to do this." And they were like, "What? You're Daryl Starr, you're awesome. Like, you're man of your word," you know? They didn't say all that, but that's what I'm projecting on them,
yeah.
like, thinking of me, and I'm just like, "Yeah, it's things are tight right now. It's not the right time for me to do this." And, man, I wanted them to pray for me, but I'm like, I'm hurting them, my stupidity, and, um but for a lot of time, years after that, I used to tell people, like, "Start your day on your knees in prayer, because if you don't, God will bring you to your
Mm.
knees." So,
Do you when you're thinking back through that time, do you feel like God is the reason why you're able to make it through?
yeah, you're gonna make me cry.
It's okay. This stuff is real, man.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, uh, I didn't hear any voices from heaven or anything during that time, like, but, uh, but I think I was humbled in a way that he didn't need to say
Yeah.
anything.
How long does this time last?
Years, dude, it was years. So, yeah, it was like, I think one of your questions was like, "When did you hit rock bottom?" And
Yeah.
I was like, "I think I bumped along the bottom for a long time." Um, but there was a lot of cool stuff in that time period too, like, the ugly pastures started to become pretty. You know, we did have a baby, and she was beautiful and healthy. Uh, but there was also, like, man, my grit, like, I was I was gritty too.
Yeah.
So, like, we didn't have health insurance, but I didn't fold. It wasn't like I didn't give up. I didn't say, I was like, I could bankrupt this dairy thing, just let it and just ruin, because the other stuff was actually working.
Mhm.
And I was out doing sales. Like, I bought this other business, and uh, I wound up finding a private lender to solve some of my, sticky situation with
Yeah.
the bank. And, praise God for the kindness of those souls through that. But man, I was also mean. Like, I would start gentle and like, "Hey, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm working on." But the moment I had like profitability starting to look okay again, I contacted all of my vendors in one setting and said, "I'll pay you 35 cents on the dollar. If you don't believe that I'm going to pay you, take this check. I'll write you a check right now.
Yeah.
And if you think I'm going to pay you with interest, then wait it out. What's your choice?"
Yeah.
And I had one of them. It was a big one, which I kind of appreciate. They didn't believe, and they said, "Oh, we'll take the money. You're going to fail." Wrote that check. F you sort of attitude, and, like,
Yeah.
nobody else did, one, in the whole midst of that, and I paid every single person back with their interest charges on their payables, and it was the right thing to do. And my daughter that was born in the midst of that, like, I went to the, uh, hospital, and I said, "We don't have insurance. I have money. Uh, I don't want a payment plan, I want a discount. How much to prepay?" And so we wound up prepaying for the C-section for like 25% of what the full price was
Yeah.
if it had gone through insurance. And I was like, people are just rotten. Like, this is so rotten. So I got really hard and tough, I think, in the midst of also being on my knees.
Yeah.
So,
Do you remember a moment where you're like, "Okay, you know what? Like, we're starting to
yeah.
pull out of this?" Like, does the dairy start making money? Is it always losing money? Or what
Yeah. So, yeah, it's great question. So, between a combination of private lender and then I don't know if it was like before or after or simultaneously. Um, I wound up restructuring data management, crop consulting business. And I think I had about 27 people at the time, and I laid off 25 of them. I hired in one person to replace that group and myself. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do sales and crew leadership for the team of part-time people that I'll bring only when I need them. And we basically just started cranking.
Do you have to downsize the business?
No.
How does that work?
Yeah, it was insane. I basically was like, I'd been frustrated because they were not working as hard as me. So I was like, here I am doing all of these things. Why aren't you? The quality control in the reports that we were producing, like we pioneered some GPS crop scouting was like one of our main things that I started at because nobody was doing this at the time. And we had all these crazy technology devices wired together with GPS and could email out these reports. And they were just doing a bad job overseeing it. And so I basically was like, you're trying to oversee this region. You're trying to oversee this region. Everybody's stuff is all different. I'm just going to centralize all of that and have one person oversee all of this data management stuff instead of trying to have a big team doing data management. And so, yeah, we just streamlined all of that stuff like insane. So because it was more on the data consulting side, we just leaned heavier into the data emphasis on the sales side of like, here's what you're trying to get and here's how we deliver it consistently. And so everybody bought into it early and it worked, but the margins got a lot better as I like tuned that up, which just got me more and more interested in developing software to do some of those processes instead of a human.
So when you decided to stop focusing like your time on the dairy and started focusing your time on the crop consulting stuff and just kind of letting the dairy be what it is for a little bit, like,
I mean, I couldn't go down there and like get more milk by being there.
Yeah, petting the cows. They're good little cows.
Yeah, I mean, so it was like, where can I generate money?
And so the profitability just go up like crazy in that consulting business because if you're your payroll 27 and you get rid of 27,
it was nuts. I mean, it was fantastic, and I was like, Sarah didn't know any difference. She was great. She did the work and kind of had extra time. So I was like, I am definitely an idiot for paying all these people for stuff that they really weren't working.
Yeah.
And they weren't bad people. I think they were trying really hard. Systems were bad. I mean, whatever. I can blame it on a bunch of stuff, but it didn't really matter. It's just like it worked better.
Was it hard to let go of those people?
No. I mean, I thought about it a lot because I was like, the business might shrink, but I was like, I'm okay shrinking. I was already okay shrinking things that don't work.
Yeah.
And it was working. I didn't want to shrink what was working, but I was like, this could be a rounding error if it shrinks. Like, it's not going to matter. I'm going to be 10 times more profitable in like an instant. So, and I could always hire back. That was the other thing. Like, I've always been really good at hiring. So if I wanted to add people, that was like, that's never been an issue. So I could always get people.
How old were you at this point?
So I'd crossed the 30 mark at that. So it's probably about 30.
So like from 26 to 30, like, would you say like life
was pretty rough? 26 to 28 was like, cool, we're starting. 29 to 31 was bumping along the bottom with basically the moment we got kind of back really into the black consistently. I mean, we put several months of, $1,000 a month, $1,000 per month in profits. I was like, it's going to take me 1,000 years to make it back there.
Yeah.
Then I was like, okay, focus shift over here. Like, let's go. Cause it was like, I mean, we've just gotten really, really good at managing the dairy without being profitable.
Yeah.
So we could lose less than other people. So I'm at this point, I'm humbled, but working hard. A young farmer loan that I had got when I was in my 20s. I was called into a regional director, loan officer meeting in Newcastle, Indiana. And they were challenging whether or not I was a farmer to qualify for this young farmer loan. And at this point of my farm, I'm like, I'm more farmer now than I was at 25 or whatever age I was when I bought this farm. But the young farmer loan is designed to help young farmers borrow money with basically a government guarantee and a ridiculously low interest rate. SBA loans now kind of serve the same kind of function for small business acquisitions. And they basically were like, here's the square box, you're a round peg. And I'm like, at the time that I borrowed, I didn't own a tractor. Now I have multiple tractors. I didn't own a corn planter. Now I got a corn planter. I didn't have cows. Now I have cows. I'm like, I'm more farmer now than I was. But they basically were like, yeah, but you're making too much money over here in this other not farming.
Oh, yeah.
So
Cause like they're saying, like you have these two things going on. You're more of a crop consultant than a farmer.
yeah, you're actually profitable. So we don't want to lend you money. So well, like, okay, here's another way that a bank can screw you.
Yeah.
So, and this one's the government. So I'm like, oh, this will be interesting. So I'm like, I've already been through like the recap, restructure of some of my short-term debt and the long-term private lender expensive money that I'm like working off all of. And I basically have gotten to, a pretty good place, healthy place. And I'm like, this is really makes me mad now. And then that was like the final nail in the coffin for me in terms of the dairy of like, I just like, why be diversified? Why do this? Like, I'm not people now that are asking me like, let's build the cheese plant. Like, let's put a dairy on my farm. You'll manage it, and I'm like, oh, no, I'm exhausted from that. I'm like, no, I've got other things that are working better, and no. so I wind up deciding to sell the dairy, close it, and mostly to get this land sold rather than going and refinancing it, going and getting another, banking thing. I'm like, I wasn't broke at the time, but I just was like over it. I'm just over it, and it wasn't making sense to stay in it.
Do you remember the day when you decided, like, no, I'm going to sell this, or was it like a long
It was
process?
a moment. I mean, it was a moment that like hit me, and I was like, yeah, we're done. Like, I'd been kind of flirting with it for, I don't know, a little while, but it wasn't years and years and years of pondering. It was years and years and years of grinding.
Yeah.
And then it was like, this is not logical. Like, this is sunk cost was a thing that like I'd studied it in college, but like I literally understood it now because I'm like, yeah, it's gone. Like, and I mark to market, like it's worth less. Like, these cows were worth this, now they're worth this. Like, that is the reality in which I live. But I felt like I was past the dip and I could think clearly, and like that's sunk costs. Like, um, and I'd already like, you don't need to make it back the way you lost it. So cows lost it. I didn't need to make it back with cows. I could make it back some other place. Yeah, and then I offered the farm land to a contract farmer neighbor that had been really good to me through the ups and downs of seed and pastures and stuff. And he deserved to be able to buy the farm. And I offered it to my dad too, which he deserved to be able to buy the farm. Like, I wouldn't have gotten into farming if it hadn't have been for him, and wouldn't exist if it hadn't been for him. And even though he and I were not getting along still, I was like, I don't want to regret this. And so I offered it to him. And then I was introduced to some land investor, and I offered it to him. And I just told all three of them, bring your best offer, and I'm not going to go back and forth because you all three deserve it. It's just whoever wants to pay for it. So the investor wound up buying it. Yeah.
Was it sad to see all this stuff go, or what did it feel like?
Yeah. So then all the equipment inside the parlor goes to the east. The metal went to scrap, and the guy that bought it, the investor, wound up buying it. Just buries the barn, and they just plant over it. But it goes back to corn. And I still drive by it today, and just like all the fence, like we put in a bunch of brand new fence and all this crazy stuff, and it's sad. It's sad. It's still sad for me.
Yeah.
Because I think the original vision was still good. Like, that's the part that's really sad is like, replay this situation and have me buying when milk was depressed. Because I wasn't, I don't know, could have flip-flopped a couple order of operations of things, and it would have like, could have worked, but I would have failed at something else. Like, that's just the demeanor of who I am as an entrepreneur, like, but succeeded in other places. And
so if you had to like sum up like how you got through the dip, like, how would you sum that up?
on my knees.
Yeah.
That's the sum. But I think you gotta get up and go fight too. Like, I mean, I think you start your day on your knees and humble yourself. Like, I don't have control over so many things that I wish I had control
Yeah.
over, but that doesn't mean that I'm like dead or I deserve to be dead or just like call it.
Yeah.
Like, you get up and go for it. Like, you still gotta, you know, grab life by the horns and get after it. And I think that that combination of humility and perseverance is how I got through it. And my wife,
Yeah.
she was, man, I said some nasty things and just was, I was like a cornered dog for a lot of that. And she took it, she handled it with class.
Yeah. What advice would you give someone who's kind of in the middle of that dip or that situation, how to navigate it with a partner?
Like, nobody's going to feel the way you feel or think exactly the way you think or experience life in the order of operations that you've experienced it. Like, your journey is different than anybody else's journey, even your spouse. And so the way my wife went through it is different than the way I went through it.
Mhm.
And I was mad at her for not understanding and believing the way I believed because of the experiences I had been through. But her experiences were, I want to be a mom. Like, I want to be a mom real bad. Like,
Mm.
I don't care about money. Like, money's not my thing. Like, my kids are my thing. And my husband, I trust, I love. Like, he's doing the things and bad things have happened. I hope we don't go bankrupt. But like, I'm not leaving him. And so she just like stuck through that. And so, and not everybody has that. Like, uh, but I think you shouldn't be an ass.
Yeah.
Like, how do you get through it? Like, admit you've made mistakes, like, humble yourself and tell your partner, like, man, if I could go back and like not run myself into the brick wall, like, I would not run myself into the brick wall. But now that I have, what do we do now? And I think keeping that dialogue open and honestly just not making permanent decisions for temporary problems is like, just zoom out,
Yeah.
look at it.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. That was Daryl Starr and how he took risk head on to try to create a beautiful dairy. Now, if you're curious where Daryl is now, he's actually started a whole other set of companies, but you can check them out by going to Little Engine Ventures. I'll link it in the show notes. Now, we release episodes every other week, so make sure to tune in to get the latest episodes. You can subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast, but what would really mean the world to me is if you head over to throughthedip.com and signed up for our newsletter. Seriously, I get a little ping every time somebody signs up, and it completely makes my day. Catch you at the next episode.